From Greater Sandton and beyond, get ready for the Sandton Times Hour
with your host,
Alexander.
Ladies and gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond, welcome to the Sandton Times Hour, edition 195. It's week 20 of 2025, and I'm Alexander Leibner. And a special welcome to everyone listening for the very first time. If that's you, pull up a seat. It's good to have you be part of the show. And of course, our regular listeners in Johannesburg and Pretoria, across South Africa and everywhere else on the globe. If you're online or on air and you're tuned in, I'm happy to report that all is well in Sandton land, and it's good to have you with us. I'd also like to hear from you. If you want to make the time to send through some questions, some comments, or provide some feedback, you can do so by emailing editor@sandtontimes.co.za, connecting on social media @Sandton Times, and hopping onto the website sandtontimes.co.za. And there's also the WhatsApp line, the exclusive one for the Sandton Times, 084 Sandton. That's 084 726 3866. That's 084 726 3866. And feel free to send through your voice notes, text messages, and so much more. If you're not part of the podcast community, make sure that you subscribe to the Sandton Times Hour on your preferred podcast platform, and it'll be good to have you listening whenever you can't do so on air. Happy belated Mother's Day to all those who marked the day this past weekend and made it extra special. And of course, a very special Happy Mother's Day to my mom as well. And Vincenzo, good to have you back behind the mixing desk, making sure we deliver the best for everyone listening. And I hope you also had a chance to take it easy this weekend and celebrate everyone that's important to you. Who are we talking to this week? Well, in a bit, I will be reopening the files on one of South Africa's most famous and mysterious air crash investigations ahead of a new mini-series on the subject. Then I catch up with our regular entertainment commentator about some of the musical experiences of my recent trip to London. And finally, there's a new book out on South Africa's very own Sun King. So stick around for that. All this and more coming up in the next hour.
Show some love.
Subscribe, share,
Leave a review and rating for the Sandton Times Hour
on your favorite podcast app now.
The best of talk and music in 1 hour. This is the Sandton Times Hour.
In the nearly 4 decades since the tragic crash of South African Airways flight SA295, also known as the Helderberg, questions have continued to smolder beneath the surface of official reports and public memory. And as Mnet's gripping new documentary series Helderberg prepares to air, one voice stands out among the experts called upon to revisit this dark chapter in South African aviation history. And his name's Dr. David Klatzow. He's a renowned forensic scientist with a reputation for challenging the status quo. And Dr. Klatzow has long scrutinized the gaps, inconsistencies, and unanswered questions surrounding the 1987 disaster that claimed 159 lives. In this interview, we're going to be delving into his perspectives on the investigation, his role in the documentary, and whether the time has finally come to uncover the truth behind one of the country's greatest aviation mysteries. And Dr. Klatzow joins me on the line right now. And Doctor, thank you for making time to be on the Sandton Times Hour.
Good evening, and good evening to all your listeners.
Wonderful. Doctor, good to have you on. You've long been a respected voice in South African forensic science. What initially drew you to the Helderberg investigation?
Well, originally I was appointed by the legal team for acting for Boeing, and that was to investigate a very limited part. They'd recovered some bodies, and what they'd done was they'd done blood carbon monoxide levels in the bodies. And I was called upon to investigate the validity of those tests that were done on the carbon monoxide. And it was very important for Boeing to know that, because they were very interested in not having the bodies die of carbon monoxide poisoning. They were very interested in that. And that's where, as far as I was concerned, it began and finished. But subsequently, Norman Chandler, who was then, and I think Norman might have gone to the great editorial suite in the sky by now, but I think that Norman Chandler wrote a piece for the Saturday Star where he made a number of fairly wild allegations about what had happened aboard the Helderberg. And the Saturday Star was then taken before the press council, funnily enough, by Arms Corps. And you might want to know why Arms Corps took them to the press council, and that I'll tell you later. But the long and the short of it was that the attorney for Boeing, who was a fellow called Peter Reynolds, I think he was with Weber Wenzel at the time, he phoned me up and said he appointed me to investigate the circumstances involved with the loss of the Helderberg, which is what I then did for the next year and a half. And I contacted everybody with the slightest knowledge about it and anybody that would give me a statement. I did something which I don't think any other South African has done. I think that I'm probably the only person who ever read the full Margot transcript of the hearing. Now that Margot transcript became very interesting because right at the very beginning, we catch Margot in what can only be described as a piece of dishonesty. Mm-hmm. And that is where he tried very hard to keep some evidence out of the inquest. By doing so, he left the smoking gun, as it were. And that was the interpretation of the cockpit voice recorder. Now, that became vitally important, and I'll tell you why. The cockpit voice recorder has, in those days, it was a 1/2 hour recording on a wire recorder which taped over itself every half an hour. Mm-hmm. And so whatever was on that was the last half hour's discussion in the cockpit. And you can hear a number of things happening. The first thing is a woman comes into the cockpit and says to the captain, "Kaptein, jy moet mooi toesig op vanaand se vlug." Now, that remark is meaningless at the end of the flight, which is where Margot wanted us to believe that this had all happened. He wanted us to believe that the cockpit voice recorder was being recorded 100 odd miles outside of Mauritius. But in fact, that comment that she made is meaningful only at the beginning. You can't tell somebody to look after the flight when the flight's finished. It's too late. Mm-hmm. The second thing is somebody in the cockpit, one of the engineers says, "Jessie, hierdie ou word nou honger. Ek wens ons kry ons dinner." Now, that's very important because dinner is served about 2.5 hours after takeoff from the first class galley to the cockpit crew, and it is not at the end of the flight. You don't have your dinner at the end of the flight. Mm-hmm. Shortly while that conversation was taking place, during that conversation, the fire alarm goes. Now, that is important because that indicates that there was a fire at the very early stages of the flight within 2 hours of takeoff of Taipei. Now, when you have a fire on board, your duty is to put the fire out if you can and get that aircraft down anywhere you can get it down safely. At that point, they were probably just in the area of the South China Sea. There were a number of places, including Diego Garcia, Bombay. There were a whole range of places where they could have put that plane down within an hour to an hour and a half. The captain was a fellow called Davy Ace, and he contacted on their private sort of radio that they had called ZUR. They contacted Jan Smuts Airport, as it was then, and said, "We want to land this aircraft. We've had a fire on board. I think we've got it out. We want to land the aircraft." He was told to fly on to Mauritius. Now, the reason was because had he landed the aircraft, number one, they already had bodies on board. There would have been deaths because any fire on board an aircraft is not good for the passenger's health. And secondly, the problem that they had was that the hold would have been searched and the contraband cargo would have been found. And I maintain and have maintained all along from the fire pattern and from the analysis that was subsequently done by fire engineers that they were carrying rocket fuel, which caught fire due to the turbulence that they flew through. And that has been covered up now for 40 years nearly.
Well, I'm chatting to Dr. David Klatzow, a forensic investigator synonymous with the matters pertaining to the SAA Helderberg disaster. He's given us a really good insight and overview as to how he got involved and some of the things that transpired on this flight, which will be captured in a new mini-series that Mnet will be releasing. After the break, we continue our discussion around this aviation disaster. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Sandton Times Hour.
So South African Airways flight SA295, a Boeing 747 named Helderberg, was en route from Taipei to Johannesburg when it lost contact with Mauritian air traffic control just after midnight. And now a new 3-part documentary series hopes to shed light once more on this aviation tragedy. I'm in discussion with forensic investigator Dr. David Klatzow, who's been party to this investigation for a couple of decades now. And Doctor, you've outlined sort of your involvement as part of what I would assume is basic routine aviation investigation. Boeing wants to make sure that their product hasn't, had any reason to bring this plane down. There's usual procedures that aviation investigators follow. But in this entire process, a lot of the things that you've highlighted have come to light. And now here we are, is it a good 40 years later, revisiting this incident in a documentary on Mnet. Will this new documentary be shedding any new light or bringing any new evidence to the forefront?
I think so. I've not seen the documentary. You must remember that I've participated as one of the participants. And I haven't seen the full documentary. I'm looking forward to seeing it. There's certainly things that I've re-emphasized, and there are other aspects about the loss of the aircraft. Statements taken from Jana Ace, who was the wife of the pilot, and that's in itself a very strange story. The loss of the ZUR tape, the tape recording that recorded the conversation asking to land, went missing. And it didn't, in fact, go missing, although Margot was told that it went missing. It never went missing. It was taken out by one of the pilots, a fellow called Jimmy Deal, and it was given to Gert van der Veer and Mickey Mitchell, who was the chief pilot at the time, and Gert van der Veer was the head of SAA at the time. They had that tape recording. And I participated in the TRC hearings into the loss of the Helderberg, and I cross-examined Gert van der Veer, and I asked him a number of times what had happened to the tape and what his response was, and his version changed with each question I asked him. So he was clearly lying because he was under oath. And when I finally put to him that he couldn't have torn a strip off the man who lost the tape because he confessed to me and confirmed with me that he was the last person in possession of the tape, he said, "I've got no answer to that question." So Gert van der Veer had the tape, and he was part of a cover-up which has bedeviled this investigation from the word go. But I'm under no illusions whatsoever that the government of the day, and by the way, the government subsequently have participated in that cover-up in order to protect South African Airways from insurance claims which could flow thick and fast. And from a reputation, I think that had this come to light and had they admitted to it, it could have sunk South African Airways without the help of the corrupt politicians.
Well, it certainly is an interesting one because I think there aren't many mysteries around aviation. Maybe the recent Malaysian Airlines flight that is still being searched for in the Indian Ocean somewhere. But this seems to be one of those that really hasn't found resolution. And as you've alluded to, it happened at a different time, at a different place. I think historical context played a big role in understanding kind of how this all came about. But the fact that it hasn't been resolved after so many years, and the fact that also SAA has been dissolved, reconstituted, brought back together, rebranded, renamed, etc., etc. How much liability would there still be with the airline all these years later, apart from giving families closure who were directly or indirectly affected by this?
I'm not sure what the legal position is as to who took over the liabilities of SAA when it was sold. That I don't know. But the point is that there are two reasons why I pursue it. One is that you should make certain that governments who commit murder and crimes of this nature should know that it will never, ever go away while there is the possibility of investigating it. And that is to prevent or to discourage it happening again. That's the one thing. The second thing is, of course, it would be very good to bring closure to those people who lost loved ones. I know a number of the people on board that aircraft who lost both parents. Samantha van der Walt, she lost both parents on the Helderberg. And Peter Ottson lost his father 12 days before he was born.
Sure.
So it would bring closure to these people. But again, it is to say a message that while there are competent investigators, that people who are contemplating this sort of criminal activity think twice about it.
What are you hoping will come out of the broadcast of this mini-series? Also considering that a lot of people would probably have not been alive or even known about this story, especially if they were born long after 1987 or not even within that time frame.
I think that setting history straight is something of value in its own right. So from that point of view, that's what I hope will come out of it. And I hope people will realize that the most likely set of events that took place and causing the loss of that aircraft were the ones that I've outlined after, as I say, almost 40 years of investigation. I don't think that there's going to be financial considerations to anybody, but that's not the main issue. The main issue, as I say, is to set the history straight, not to have this country mired in the lies of the past.
I guess the other big challenge as well is, as time progresses, and you've also highlighted it's almost 40 years since this happened, is that a lot of the eyewitnesses and the institutional knowledge and those who potentially could provide answers are either aging or have passed away or are no longer able to tell those stories. And that must make the investigation or the forensic part of it quite challenging.
Well, yes, but I mean, remember that a lot of this was done when they were still around. So a lot of my investigation was done when they were still around. We're talking about 20 years ago.
A lot of this information, from what I'm understanding, is then being kept somewhere. It's just a question of unlocking it.
Yes. And I think somewhere that tape is lurking. The missing tape, I think, is lurking. I do not think it's been destroyed. And the other thing about it is this, is that I think that one should realize that Margot participated in what was a dishonest inquiry. And that is a great tragedy when our judges of the High Court get involved in this political shenanigans that goes on in order to protect a corrupt and dishonest government.
That's the voice of Dr. David Klatzow. He is one of the voices featured in a new series called Helderberg. It will be up on Mnet on the 15th of May, 2025 at 8 p.m. It's a 3-part documentary series hoping to shed some light on the aviation tragedy known as Helderberg. And to give you a bit of a feel for the documentary, here's the trailer.
Mauritius, bring back to 905.
The safety officer at South African Airways called me and said, we're missing one of our airplanes out of Mauritius.
Something burnt like hell on that plane.
What caused the fire? Never answered, never even attempted to answer.
The biggest question is, was there foul play involved?
In that time of our history, you were very aware of what the government was capable of doing.
People were too scared to come forward with what they know.
It just got more and more Looney Tunes.
There's no doubt in my mind that there was something seriously illicit going on and that it wasn't a one-off, but this one had gone wrong.
There are 159 families who don't have answers, and they deserve answers.
So there you have it, Helderberg, Tragedy or Treachery. It'll be up on Mnet. And Dr. David Klatzow, it's been such a pleasure having you on the Sandton Times Hour.
Thank you very much.
You're listening to the Sandton Times Hour.
Taking you into the second half, this is the Sandton Times Hour. I'm Alexander Leipner, and if you were listening to the show and wondering who that person was, what we spoke about, or where there's more that you can find out and read, well, hop onto the website, sandtontimes.co.za. Click on the show notes for this week, and we'll put up all the details there for you to read in your own time. And you can find some more links, some more information, some more details there. Also, you can also visit the social media accounts at Sandton Times on your preferred platform, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, you name it. Go find it and feel free to follow there. Or check out the WhatsApp line. Use it, 084 Sandton. That's 084 726 3866, 084 726 3866. And feel free to send through your voice notes, messages, and media there. Talking about media, we turn the microphone to our entertainment commentator, Tat Wolfen, as we do every single week. And Tat, it's good to have you on the show again.
Hi, Alex, and I have a surprise for you. I'm going to turn the microphone straight back into your face because
a duel.
I know that you saw a whole bunch of shows in London, and I actually want to know about them, so we might as well share them with our fellow Santonites.
Yes, that sounds like a good idea. Okay, yeah.
Well, I know that you saw a show that's been running around the world since forever. Phantom of the Opera.
Yes.
So shall we kick off with that?
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, no visit to London is complete without watching Phantom, right? And I mean, I think it's been going for over 30 years. It's what's incredible, and maybe we just touch on this musical culture in London, is the fact that you've got musicals that are not just running for a season or for a month or for a few weeks. There's theatres that I don't think have ever seen any other musical but one musical, be it Les Miserables or The Lion King or whatever, for 3 decades, which is absolutely incredible.
I think it's obviously because they have tourist turnover. You know, we don't really have tourists in Joburg, so they're going to play something like that for a month or two, and then it's tickets. So
that's
speak.
it. Yeah.
So, but you talk about a show having run forever. Before I ask you about this particular production, and I know I said I was going to turn the mic on you, but you need to give me a couple of minutes here.
Sure.
I've seen Phantom of the Opera. I've seen it in London, and I saw a production in Pretoria, and I've also seen it at the Teatro. And I must tell you that the production in London was awful. It was an embarrassment. And the only reason I think for that is that same cast had probably been playing it for the last 7 or 10 years or whatever. And they were just dragging their heels through this thing, it was so lackluster. And at one stage the chandeliers come crashing down onto the floor from the theater ceiling. Even those chandeliers sort of sagged onto the floor. They didn't crash. They kind of drooped onto the floor. It was an awful production. So, yeah, that can be the dangers of running a show forever and not refreshing the cast. But hopefully you had a better experience.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's one of those things, you go there because it is the original Phantom production. Look, the theatre needs some serious intervention in terms of its seating, I mean, and never mind pricing. So whenever these productions do happen in Johannesburg or in South Africa, don't walk, run. I mean, the price you're paying for a ticket, you're paying not only the price for a seat that is in the theatre, but it is way more comfortable, way better position. I mean, listen, we are spoiled for choice when it comes to entertainment, and our South African casts do an incredible job. I mean, we spoke about My Fair Lady, and there's been a whole myriad of them, and I must say, that is incredible. However, having said that, I went to go see The Cause at the Royal Albert Hall, and between The Cause, who were an incredible band performing, in their 50s, the most fantastic lineup, the Royal Albert Hall as a venue to go see something is an experience on its own.
Well, tell us a bit about that, because I know if you compare the Teatro to most of the West End theatres, the Teatro just beats them hands down. So I need to know about why the Royal Albert Hall is different.
Well, look, I think what makes it so interesting, I mean, obviously being a very old building, but I think it is just one of those venues that is, firstly, I think, built for purpose in terms of live performances. There is no bad seat in that hall, I believe. I mean, I think wherever you sit, you've got a great view. The audio, the sound is amazing, and just the ambiance that it creates when you watch something live. And I think that's always been a bit of a challenge in terms of venues in Johannesburg. I mean, if you wanted to have a big concert somewhere, you've either had the Northgate Dome, which was not really built to host concerts, so they had to sort of reverse engineer a lot of things in terms of sound, in terms of parking, and it was never really a great venue, but it was probably one of the few venues that you could fit a lot of people in for a concert. Then we had F&B Stadium, which logistically also becomes very complicated. And if you're not going to fill that whole stadium, all 90,000 seats, it's not a venue as an option. And then you're left with...
And it's bleak.
Yes.
And sadly, it's bleak. It's not nice. Yeah.
So you're left with very few options. And then you've got the Sunbet Arena, which is one of the few purpose-built venues for something like this. And it works, and it's obviously quite industrial in the way it's put together because it kind of does what it says on the box. Once again, it's in Pretoria, and I always laugh when artists come on stage and say, "Good evening, Johannesburg," and it's actually Pretoria, but never mind. But we don't have anything in Greater Sandton or in Johannesburg that you can compare to the Royal Albert Hall, Madison Square Garden, where public transport is integrated, where the seating is, the flow is good. You can exit that venue within, a short period of time. The catering facilities are there. And I must say, the Royal Albert Hall, if you'd watched anything there, it would have been an experience, never mind the cause.
And the Cause, were they okay?
The Cause were spectacular. I mean, I've always loved their music. I think they really are one of those bands who put Irish music on the map in one way or another. They've written hit after hit after hit. And to think that they are, as I say, well into their 50s now, and were able to hold up an almost 2-hour set without any interruptions. I mean, they're all siblings. They've been performing together forever. At one point, I actually thought they'd actually retired. But, having sold 40 million albums worldwide, I can't see why they wouldn't actually get back on stage around the world. I think there is a little bit of a tour that they are planning. I see they're doing some concerts in Germany now over the summer season. But this was really just a once-off in London for, I think it's called the Teenage Cancer Foundation or Cancer Trust. I think it's a little bit like what CHOC does in South Africa. And it was a bit of a fundraiser. So it wasn't only just a great night out, but it was also, money going towards a good cause. And it was just sensational. I mean, if the cause ever come to South Africa, I can tell you right now, once again, don't walk, but run to get your tickets.
Sorry, did you say money going towards a good cause? I saw what you did there. Yeah. Look, before you kick me out of the studio, I want you to tell me about a very polite activity that you engaged in Hyde Park, not Hyde Park here, but in Hyde Park, London.
Yeah, man. So this was another great one. So this was, I suppose, something very typically British to do, which was to go have afternoon tea. We decided to pull into the Mandarin Oriental in Hyde Park in London, one of the most famous hotels in London, not far from Harrods. It's 140 years old, and they do a really stunning afternoon tea. But how this fits into this conversation is that as part of that afternoon tea, which is an experience on its own in terms of sandwiches and scones and sort of all the sweet and savory treats, is that they had a live violinist performing in this tea room. And she actually had the most incredible CV that I only found out about afterwards. I'd obviously had a chat to her during her performance and then did a bit of research afterwards. She'd performed for the royal family. She'd even performed with Madonna. Some of her sound had been captured for the Bridgerton backtrack. And I thought, wow, how is this? Here we're sitting having afternoon tea in a hotel, and there's somebody with this kind of provenance performing in a setting like this. And, sometimes if you're not paying top dollar for a ticket, you sometimes kind of underestimate what kind of music or talent you've got access to.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, with a lot of these people that perform in small coffee shops and stuff, okay, well, she's obviously been discovered. But have you not found that sometimes you just go to a place and there's like a one-man band or like a three-person band or something, and sometimes you think, damn, you really should be discovered because you are incredibly talented. But in this case, she was pre-discovered, right?
That's it. And I mean, I often say to people, because sometimes people go, I would never pay that much for a scone or for a sandwich or for an afternoon lunch or etc. Yeah. And I sometimes say to people, look, you're actually buying a theater ticket or a performance ticket, and you happen to get some food with it, not the other way around. And I think that kind of reframes it quite nicely, especially with some of the talent that is floating about. But Tat, I see time's not on our side, but it's been fun for you to turn around the microphone and for me to also have a chance to reflect on some of the more cultured and musical things I got to experience in London during my recent visit.
Yeah, and maybe you can make me work harder next week. But until then, take it easy.
You're listening to the Sandton Times Hour.
Well, she's no stranger to bold, brave, and boundary-pushing books, and her latest publishing coup might just be one of her most daring yet. Melinda Ferguson, a renowned publisher and literary powerhouse, has brought to light a long overdue story, the first ever biography of South Africa's most flamboyant and formidable hospitality tycoon, Sol Kerzner. In a collaboration with UK-based author and former Kerzner confidant Peter Venison, this behind-the-scenes memoir unpacks the myths, the man, and the monumental legacy of the creator of Sun City, the Palace, and the world-famous Atlantis resorts, which are found all around the world. It's a tale of genius, grit, and glamour, and at the heart of it all, well, a man who reshaped the global hotel industry and a publisher who knew the story had to be told. Joining us now is Melinda Ferguson to talk about the secrets she kept, the stories that are finally told, and why Sol Kerzner's life makes for one of the most compelling reads of the year. Welcome to the Sandton Times Hour, Melinda.
What an intro. I'm so happy to hear all that. It's just so lovely that you've given me such a great intro, and more than me, the book, Sol Kerzner. I mean, what a legend.
Well, Melinda, you came up to me during a dinner we were having in, funny enough, in Sun City at the Palace. And you told me about this book that you were about to release. It's now out. And I remember at the time, you deemed it to be a very well-guarded secret. What made this biography of Sol Kerzner so sensitive or such a high-stake publishing, let's call it, gamble?
Alexander, there have been a numerous attempts at publishing a Sol Kerzner book. While Sol was still alive, Jonathan Ball, I'm not sure how many years ago, it was probably maybe 2 decades ago, a very contentious book was attempted to be published. Annalyn, who was not married to Sol at the time, but they joined forces and they brought an urgent interdict against that book. It was written by Alan Greenblow. And that book got taken out of circulation. Jonathan Ball had so many books printed, and all those books went to nothing. Then the author and the publisher tried to redo the book. Again, the judge banned the book. Sol Kerzner and Annalyn, I think, won with costs. So those were 2 very difficult books to obviously publish, and they never came out. And then Sol himself commissioned a man in the UK to write his biography, but that also, in the book, we have a whole section on that. It also came to nothing. Sol fired the author. And so there was never a book about the great Sol Kerzner. He unfortunately passed away in 2020 without a book about him. So when this book came, everyone, I promise you, was really scared. Like, I could not find partners to do it with. People were going, this book will never hit the shelves. It's just got one of those things that, like, it won't be allowed to hit the shelves. So honestly, the fact that this book is out, the very first Sol Kerzner book, has been for me quite a publishing coup.
Well, listen, Sol Kerzner is a South African hospitality legend. He is one of those names synonymous with South Africa's history when it comes to hotels, resorts, leisure, and obviously also the casino business. When Peter first approached you with this idea, I mean, Peter having been quite close to him, did you have a sense of hesitation, a sense of excitement? Was it a bit of both?
Oh, no, I just was like, give me the book. Give me the book. I mean, originally he had tried to almost do a biography of Sol, and I said to him, no, this is not going to fly. Let's get this into a memoir. Because Peter was not just someone who happened to know Sol. He worked very closely as a chief operating executive officer. I never know all these acronyms. He worked on the big projects like the Palace. He met Sol, and I have to tell you this little story. I hope we've got time. He was running the Carlton in London. Peter Venison was the manager. And he heard the screeching and shouting in the foyer. And there was this tiny man, because Sol Kerzner was only 5'5", ranting and raving, swearing. I'm not going to give all the F words that he was doing. And Peter, being the gentleman, he was 27 years old. He kind of, excuse me, sir, what's the problem? And Sol was holding a little dress that had been shrunk by the laundry of the hotel. This was actually his mistress at the time. It wasn't his wife. And Peter, being the very nice gentleman, said, don't worry, Mr. Kerzner, we'll buy another dress. The dress is so small, it shouldn't cost that much to replace. And that's how the 2 of them met. Sol was so impressed by Peter, the way he handled it, that he landed up offering him a job in South Africa.
And clearly that relationship and the proximity to Sol clearly also sort of adds a very different tone and perspective to the book than maybe some of the other books were going to do.
Oh, there's so many personal anecdotes. There's the time, when Sol is running the whole Palace project, and it's just the most mammoth. I mean, we've all been to the Palace. You can imagine what chaos and insanity was going on while building the Palace. And at that time, Sol was drinking a lot. So Peter talks a lot about the Johnny Walker Black that Sol was like downing. And they would catch this jet from the UK to oversee the project, the two of them together. And there's a fantastic scene in the book where Peter is trying to watch over Sol while he sleeps, but Sol is having nightmares and instructing everybody during these nightmares, swearing his head off in this jet. And just being like I think Peter took great care of Sol, loved him deeply. And then you'll see in the book, they become eventual adversaries, which makes for a very, very interesting story.
I mean, if you look at back in history, those people who've done incredible things that have stood the test of time, do have a certain quirk, a certain eccentricity, a certain character that just is bold, daring, and often sometimes very loud. Do you feel that of all the stories you've written, of the books you've published, that sort of Sol Kerzner is just one of those people who had to be larger than life to achieve some of the things that he achieved?
It's been such an honor to bring Sol to life, if one can call it that, because he was clearly a genius and he was clearly hectic to work for. He was the most demanding man. He threw his toys, he shouted at people, he freaked people out, but he always delivered these incredible products. And it is like what you've just said, the kind of genius comes along with kind of a difficult personality. And Sol Kerzner definitely had both of those, a very difficult personality to work for, brash, demanding, unforgiving, and then this other very generous, dreamer, amazing man who could actually deliver everything on time. His projects were never late, and I find that to be incredibly inspiring in the book, that Sol Kerzner was so relentless with deadlines that he just never delivered late.
It's unbelievable. Now, you've published many powerful books over the years. Where do you think this biography ranks for you in terms of significance and it being sort of a benchmark or a milestone when it comes to publishing books?
Well, I mean, this book is doing incredibly well. There's been an enormous uptake of the book. I think that people are really interested in the great legend and the flaws, the warts and all of Sol Kerzner. For me, at this point, maybe it's just because it's so exciting at the moment, I feel like this ranks top of the pile. This is for me my own proudest moment actually in publishing.
If you want to go check it out, the book is called Sol. It's available in all good bookstores and also online if you want to give it a read, and certainly a part of South African hospitality history, a part of South Africa's fibre. And Melinda Ferguson, it's been such a pleasure chatting to you about this latest release, and we're wishing you all the best.
Yes, thanks so much for the opportunity.
And that's all we have time for this week on the Sandton Times Hour. As always, available on all good podcast platforms wherever you are in the world: Apple, Amazon Music, Spotify, and so many more. Feel free to send through your questions and comments if you'd like during the week on editor@sandtontimes.co.za. Connect on social media @Sandton Times and hop onto the website sandtontimes.co.za. Also, use the WhatsApp line 084 Sandton. That's 084 726 3866, 084 726 3866. And we always welcome your videos, voice notes, text messages, and so much more. Thank you to all our guests who made time to be on the show this week. And of course, thank you to the team who always makes things happen. Thank you to you for taking the time to listen. And God willing, we'll do it all again next week.
You're listening to the Sandton Times Hour.
So let's wrap it up on the Sandton Times Hour on 919 and play out with one more feel-good track. And how about a last one for the moms? And here's Phil Collins with some advice he got from his mom. You can't hurry love.
That's it for this week. Thanks for listening to the Sandton Times Hour. And if you enjoyed it, be sure to share it.